Okay, so now that we have our Rhino model actually in our physical space, you can see we've got this railing and shade structure, a decking, and even a kind of support system going in here. So one of the first things I like to do as I prepare to render this out is start to figure out where do I want that view to be from. In this example, we can see that's really just a segment of what would be in reality the actual design. So it's okay that it's just a segment, but you have to be kind of strategic of understanding where the design ends or starts to leave the actual composition. And so I try to always kind of use this Rhino window frame to kind of help me figure that out. The other thing I like to do with these perspectives too is actually put them in that first person perspective to make it a little more immersive so that the audience starts to feel more kind of encapsulated in the design. So what we want to do is set up a camera that's going to be at that eye level. And so what's great about it is that you have the properties panel here and we have both a camera location and the target location. And notice that there's also the Z value. So that's basically what's going to represent our eye line. So something I like to do is just create a vertical line that's about 5.5 feet tall. So I'll do line, V for vertical, and I'll put that somewhere over here. And again, I'll do 5.5. I'll make sure that it is going in that upward direction. So this is the idea, is that at least I can be in the correct Z location in relation to my decking. So now I'll go ahead and go to the camera and say place. And I'll just pan so I can actually see the top of it and click down. So now you can see that it feels a little bit more inside of the thing in the boardwalk design here. The other thing you want to be aware of too is what direction you're looking at. So you can see that my Z location is at 6.355. So if I want it to be perfectly horizontal, as if I'm just looking straight ahead, I want to make sure that the Z target is also at that same value. If I want it to be as if I'm looking down, I would use a lower value. If I want it to look more towards the sky, I'll have a higher value. But for now, we'll just again, use the same exact values as that one. And now we can start to see what that looks like. And I can see that part of the model starts to get cut off there. So if I just use the pan or even the zoom, I should be able to cut off some of that, or at least have it take up the whole thing. Or I might even want to start to orbit around a little so that only part of that is inside the composition. So it'll take a little bit of finessing, but you'll be able to eventually kind of get to that location. And I remember that it's at that 6.355. So if I just kind of get it within that kind of area, and now I can hit 6.355 again and do, that's already pretty close. Right, so now we've got what you might consider your view. Once you figure that out and you really like where it's at, it's good to actually set this view. So what you want to do is now go to View, Set View, and choose Name View. You can see I've already got several set up, and that's what's great, is that you can set up several of these throughout the process. So you can make slight adjustments, you can really kind of put yourself in all sorts of different locations and not have to worry about losing that. So I'm going to do render view demo. Okay, and it'll refresh all those views. And now what's great about it is that if I want to decide to kind of look around or make some adjustments, maybe I want to get rid of this line now. I can even explore other locations. And if I want to return to that, I just go to View, Set View, and select the one I want to go back to. And it'll bring me right back there. So it's a great way to make sure that you don't lose these views, because sometimes you'll be rendering out several different iterations. You want to make sure everything matches. So this ensures that all of that happens. So the next thing I want to show in this video is how you can start to assign materials. I'll show you two different options here. First one will be, let me actually change some of this. So right now I have like them actually modeled out to be the objects themselves, but sometimes you don't want to have to go through that effort of modeling it, but you can actually just assign materials. So what I want to do, instead of using the boardwalk treads, I'll just use a boardwalk surface. So this is just a solid surface. But again, I can kind of emulate what that material might be still. I'm going to do the same thing for this railing and shade structure. So again, I'm going to use the surface instead of this, the one with holes. I think, pretty sure, yep. And then I'll do the same thing for the shade structure. I've got the surface and the rebuilt one. So now I can actually treat those as solid surfaces. And again, maybe you won't have to go through that effort of actually creating perforations in this, but maybe you just want to use something more generic in that case. So what I like to do is, again, just go online and search for a perforated material. You'll see that I've already got some materials already selected, and I'll go ahead and show you how I can do that. So I'm going to select the object. I want to go to material. I'm going to do something really quick too, just to kind of show us another step to this because it's important. I'm going to go ahead and select object, and here I can actually assign a texture. So I'm going to go down to color. So color basically represents textures or even just a solid color. And I can click this, and you can see here's my library of some materials I downloaded. So let's just start off with something that, again, already has a perforation to it. So here's a perforated core 10 steel. You're going to see that most likely, especially if it's a very kind of fluid and abnormal surface, that it's going to look very skewed. And this is why we have to apply different surface mapping to these materials so that they actually line up and look correct and not all distorted. So I'm going to, again, select this object. You'll see that there's this other option for texture mapping. In order to start to actually assign that, I can click to apply surface mapping, and it'll give me some options for the type of mapping. You can see that there's surface, there's planar, UV, UVW, there's box, spherical, cylindrical, all sorts of different options. So let's just see what happens if I use the planar UV. It looks like it starts to get it to some degree, at least. It seems kind of like it matches in some areas, but other areas, again, it gets kind of distorted. So that still doesn't exactly solve the issue. The planar UV would work really good on just flat surfaces, right? That's why it's called planar. So let's try the box. And the box is a good one to go to for any type of object that starts to have multiple dimensions. There's some areas where it still doesn't match up perfectly, right? So over here, we can kind of see that it starts to get a little triangulated or angled in those areas. But again, most likely from that view that we've set up, you aren't even going to really notice that. So here now, I can actually start to adjust the scale for this as well as some of the other characteristics. So you can see that I've got XYZ position. You really don't have to adjust that too much unless you want to really show a specific joint or condition in that material to line up accordingly. So in this case, I don't really have to worry about that too much. Even rotation can be an option. Maybe instead of them reading just vertically, you could even angle them. And then you can also see that there's an XYZ size. So this is what's going to allow you to scale your material. So I'm going to just say lock so that X, Y, and Z all scale in the same value. So I'm just going to hold shift and just click up to start to scale these to be a little bit bigger. I'm going to exaggerate this too for the purposes of making sure that it doesn't take forever to render. I'm going to adjust one more thing again. I'll show this in another video. But now you'll see that, again, it's a perforated material. I should see through it. Sometimes, depending on the rendering, it'll still give a solid transparency, but in reality it actually renders out. But you'll see if I do a render preview, this just allows you to do a very kind of quick, rough rendering. You can see that, in fact, it is solid. So this is why we also have the option in our materials to add transparency to it. Oops, let's go back. So you can see that there's also transparency. And this is basically asking for an alpha channel. So the way the alpha channel works is that everything that's painted white is going to read solid, and everything that's painted black is going to read transparent, right? It's a void of an object, right? Kind of like any figure ground. So often you aren't able to get that alpha channel with materials that you just download, but it's actually pretty easy to make in Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and open up these materials. So you can see I've already got that up. Here's my perforated Core 10 steel. And even though it's been rescaled and everything in Rhino, the alpha channel will remap to this as well, so you don't have to worry about that either. So what I want to do is double click on here, and what I can do now, I can do it a couple different ways actually. So sometimes if you're good about it, you can find a PNG that actually has some transparency to it. I'll see if I can, pretty sure I have some already on here. If I look at the details, I can see which ones are ping. So yep, that's one. So you can see that this one actually is a PNG, which is great. But again, a lot of times you aren't able to get that PNG, so I want to show that part as well. So one of my favorite techniques to get rid of this white color in a solid image is if I go to blending options and I have this slider here, and if I start to drag the white, it'll start to remove that. And it's a little bit hard to see with the checkered background if you actually get rid of all that white. So I'm going to cancel out of that. I'm going to create a brand new layer and give it a very vibrant color to see if it really does truly get rid of that white in all the areas I want it. So again, it's a white, green, vibrant background. I've got this. This will help me figure out if I've actually removed all the whites I want. So I'll just start to kind of click that, and you can see that you can kind of continue to drag that until you get all those little bits of white. And you can even do it in a way to kind of smooth it out as well. I'll show that in another video, but you can see when I get around here that it reads quite transparent, right? So I can go ahead and get rid of that. So it's not actually physically getting rid of those yet. We have to do a couple more steps to give it more of a transparency, because what I like to do is hold control and click this thumbnail, and it should just select where there's pixels, right? You would think it's just the Core 10 steel, but it's actually still selecting the entire object. So what I want to do is right click, convert it to a smart object, then I'm going to right click and rasterize that layer, and that basically gets rid of that blending I just did with that gradient slider. And now you can see if I actually hold control to select just the pixels in that layer and click this thumbnail, now the marching ants are only around the object itself. It actually is reading transparent versus previously. So now that we've actually got it reading like a PNG file, I can again just go ahead and create 2 new layers. I want to hold control on my keyboard and put my cursor over the actual Core 10 material so that I've just got that selected. I'm going to go to this layer 2, I'm going to use the paint bucket. If I've got those different colors, I can always hit D to bring it back to its default colors. I'm going to hit X to switch. I'm going to click on this. So there's, again, part of this alpha channel, the white, is going to keep that part of the texture solid. And then this back layer, I'm going to do black. So I'm just going to hit X to switch my foreground and background color and click that. And now I have a alpha channel essentially. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And it doesn't have to be a PNG. You can actually save it as a JPEG. So I'm going to do perforated corten steel alpha demo, I guess. Since I already have it there. So we got our alpha channel now. Let's go back to Rhino. And now I want to add that transparency to it. So here's the one I just created. And it actually starts to read it immediately in the rendering view. So make sure that this is set to rendered, not shaded, but actual rendered. And so now you've got that. And again, it takes a little bit just to get that material set up, and maybe you have it on multiple objects. So in that case, again, I've got this one I want to apply it to as well. I'll go ahead and make sure that this is all erase. So again, I can show you another technique. So what's great about it, every time you kind of assign a material, it actually gets stored in your material editor. So I'll just go to material editor. You can see that it's right there. I can just click, hold, and drag it onto that. I could right click it and say assign to selection. That'll assign it. And again, you can see that it's got its own kind of texture mapping, which again, you want to make sure things are consistent. So what I like to do is I'll select this, and you have the option to match a mapping. So I'm going to click this paintbrush and click this, and now it's matching to that. So now we've got our kind of custom or our material of our corten steel in here. The other thing I want to do is show you another example for other materials. In this case, what if I have just a solid surface that I want to apply some type of decking material? I'm going to again select this, go to material, select it for an object, texture, and now let's apply this boardwalk material. And again, I've already done this previously, so it's already kind of set up the way it should be. So I want to show you how it's going to kind of by default look like this, which is really kind of weird and distorted. It's kind of interesting, honestly, but probably not the outcome you want. So again, what you want to do is go to apply surface mapping, set of views surface, see what happens with the planar UV. It's actually going to keep it perfectly horizontal with the world plane, but we can still at least change the scale. And this is one of those examples where I'll show you where maybe you want to adjust the position and rotation as well. So I'm going to first just increase the size and scale. Okay. Now I want, instead of it seeming like it gets cut off, right? So notice how part of that is showing there. That's there. Most likely we aren't going to see it, but it's just for one of those things for the sake of getting it all to match. You can also see what happens with the box. The box actually kind of corrects this part. So if I keep it at the planar UV, you can see that it kind of distorts it in that direction. But again, if you do it as a box, if you kind of think of it as a solid object, it actually makes it look like you're cutting through that plane or that wood decking material. So let's actually adjust both the position and rotation. So I'm going to click on this icon and choose to basically start to match it from that corner. And now from there, I can start to rotate it until it basically looks parallel with the actual Rhino geometry, right? It's still, again, slightly skewed. So if I rotate it on the Z-axis, you can see how I can start to get it to match up that way. And this is again one of those things where in reality it should be turning, it's just kept planar, but you're most likely not going to see it as it turns, especially if I go to my view, right? You can't really tell that it's not turning with it. And this is one of the things you have to be mindful with your rendering is only render what you are going to see. You don't have to worry about making it look perfect or get fixated on things that aren't even going to be seen in the composition. So be very mindful of that. That it just has to really kind of match the view that you're setting up. So that's how you can just take very simple, or maybe not necessarily simple geometry, but just solid geometry and assign textures and transparent materials to it. Let's go back to what I was first showing with my custom perforations and decking as well. Right, so I can see that instead of it being a material, these are all just individual. It's got its own custom perforation. So in this case, very similar. I just don't have to actually apply that alpha channel. I just want to apply a material to this. So I'm going to click material again for object, texture, and you can see that I've even got some standard Core 10 steel here. Let me recalibrate this a little so I can actually zoom in. Oops. Let's try that again. Right, and I mean, sometimes the scale seems to match really well. Sometimes you still want to adjust it a little bit, but I'm actually pretty happy with that. And again, I can go ahead and go to Render, Material Editor, and assign this new material. And if I want, I could always just double check to make sure they're both using the same mapping. And so there's that. The next thing is, again, I want to apply a material to our treads. This is nice because this will actually begin to match the direction of our treads, as you'll see. So again, I want to actually select all my objects. Go to material for object, oops, texture, and again, I'm going to just apply this boardwalk material. And I want to just adjust the position with the texture mapping. I'll use the box. Starts to lag a little bit because there's just a lot of materials being assigned. It kind of messes up the scale again, but and it's just going to take a hot second. Let's try it with 3 for now. Basically, we want these to almost represent one pane, so, or one tread, maybe 2 at the most. So let's try it. Showing almost 4 right now, so let's try bumping that up to 6. So that's a little better, and then we can change again the rotation. Again, it's lagging quite a bit, so I'm not gonna get too crazy. You kind of understand the workflow already. Oops, so let's not use the box. Let's just use the planar UV. Because I'll show you that if you keep it with the planar UV, it'll actually match these treads. Oops, let's try planar UVW. For some reason, it really doesn't like having to apply this material to all these objects, but again, you'll see the value of doing it this way. Oops, it doesn't even seem to like that one. Let's just try using the surface. There we go. So now you can see, if I deselect that, these treads actually follow that rotation, which is nice. It looks a little kind of tiled, right? Because it's just kind of repeating that pattern over and over, but again, it at least matches the rotation of it. So there you go. So this is just, again, kind of a quick way to assign materials. I don't usually like to go completely overboard, just wanting to render out things that are going to be easier to do in this than in Photoshop, right? As you have in perspective, vanishing points, textures become more smaller as they get further away, different transparency of materials starts to overlap. That just becomes very difficult in Photoshop to show that same level of depth and perspective with the vantage point. So do it to the extent that you don't have to feel like you're going to commit too much time and effort into it. And this is going to be a series of videos that just go through this step by step. So you'll see a continuation of this workflow in the next video.